Hi there guys, and welcome to another video. So this video is the third and final part of my Tailscale series, and we're going to be looking at how we can set up a reverse proxy using a VPS, Swag and Tailscale to securely connect back to a home server that's behind Carrier Grade NAT, such as Starlink, or in fact many other ISPs as well. Now before we start, let's quickly talk about what Carrier Grade NAT actually is, and why it complicates setting up a reverse proxy directly back to our home servers. Well, Carrier Grade NAT is a method used by ISPs such as Starlink, and it seems more and more others nowadays, where multiple users they share a single public IP4 address. Now this helps them manage the shortage of IP4 addresses, but it means for us that we don't actually get our own public IP address on our ISP home connection. So as a result of this, it's really difficult to actually be able to directly connect to our server from the internet, because we're not in control of routing any incoming connections to our specific devices at home. So basically what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be getting a cheap VPS which does have a public IP address. So if we run the Swag reverse proxy on the VPS which does have a public IP, we can host services like Nextcloud, Jellyfin, or other web apps while keeping our Unraid server securely hidden behind Tailscale. Now, yes, of course, having a VPS does cost some money, but it's really quite cheap and inexpensive. You can get one for under $5 a month. In my opinion, you can get away with a virtual server with one virtual CPU and only 2 gigs of RAM. Now Tailscale, it's really lightweight and doesn't really require much processing power, and Swag, it's basically just a reverse proxy built on Nginx, and unless we're handling really high volumes of traffic, I think one virtual CPU is sufficient for most reverse proxy tasks that we're going to be doing on our home server. So where to get the actual VPS from? Well, anywhere really, just try and pick a location that's fairly close to your geographical location. So if you're in the United States, don't pick a VPS in the UK. And also, remember it's better to get one that has unlimited bandwidth, especially if you're going to be pushing video through your reverse proxy and using it for things like Plex or MB. If we look here for instance at DigitalOcean, yeah, their prices are fairly cheap, but you don't get a lot of bandwidth. So we get 1000 gigs here, which is a terabyte. So if you're watching a lot of video through that, that might not be enough. And if we look at Linode, well, a similar situation there. So if you're wanting to be streaming video through your reverse proxy, I wouldn't recommend either of these. If you're wanting to just put things like Nextcloud through, well, it's probably going to be absolutely fine. In fact, not long ago, Linode actually reached out to me, offering me sponsorship to make a video using their platform. And after seeing the bandwidth restrictions, I didn't think they'd be the best fit for this particular video. Now I'm not saying there's anything wrong with either DigitalOcean or Linode, they're both very good companies, but for making this video I didn't want to use them, because I think for a lot of you viewers who are watching, you may well want to use more bandwidth than what the lower packages with these companies are actually offering. So this video isn't sponsored by any companies at all, it's just sponsored by my wonderful Patreons. And the VPS that I'm using is one over here in the UK called FastHosts. They offer unlimited traffic, which is really good. Now, if you're in the United States, I probably wouldn't recommend using FastHosts, basically because their data centers are in the UK, and you may get a little bit of latency because of the distances between you and the data centers over here. So just make sure to shop around, just do some Google searches for unlimited bandwidth VPS, and see if you can get yourself a deal. Now, if you find any that are really good, then please share them with everyone else and post them in the comments of this video. Now, as I was saying earlier, the cheaper VPSs at FastHosts, well, we can't use any of the other data centers. I think we can when their VPS is over £10 a month. You can choose Germany, Spain and USA then, but for the cheaper ones you can't. Now, I've found that many VPS providers, if you pay up front for like a year or two, you do tend to get prices a little bit cheaper, but I'd always recommend just get 1 month first, see how it goes, and then if it's good, then come back and pay for a whole year and save yourself a bit of money. Right, anyway, so once you've got your VPS, we're going to want to install Ubuntu on our VPS server. Okay, because I've already got my VPS here, I'm going to have to actually just reinstall the OS. We can see here I'm already running Ubuntu 22.04. So I'm going to choose Ubuntu here. I'm going to go for 2204 again, I think. Not that it really matters which version that you're going to install. Okay, so Ubuntu's been successfully installed onto the server. Now, a lot of VPSs, you can actually log into a remote console straight into the OS. Personally, I'm not a great fan of logging in through a remote console like this. I'd rather SSH in. So for that, we're going to need to know what the root password is for our server. So here I can click on View Password, and we can see there's the remote password for my server. So I'm going to copy that onto the clipboard. But before trying to SSH into this server, we're going to have to open up the firewall to allow us to connect via SSH. And whilst we're there, we may as well put some other things in the firewall rules as well. So on your VPS, just go to where your firewall policies are, and we're going to add 3 new rules. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add port 22 for SSH. And the protocol which SSH uses is TCP. Now, some of you might have a static IP address at home with your ISP. Now, if you do, I'd recommend just allowing SSH only from your IP address at home. So if you've got a static IP address, just pop it in the allowed IP section just to restrict access only for you. So let's add this rule. Now, whilst we're here, we may as well add another 2 rules which we're going to need. So obviously we're going to be setting up a reverse proxy. So we're going to need TCP port 443 to allow the SSL traffic through. And for port 443, we'd want to allow access from all IPs. So let's add this rule. And so finally, the last rule I'm going to add is this time for UDP, I'm going to open up UDP 41641. Now this is the port that Tailscale can use to receive incoming connections from other devices on your Tailnet. So this really helps to allow Tailscale to make a direct connection between your devices, greatly lessening the chance of Tailscale having to use an in-between relay, or what's known as a DERP. Now don't worry that you can't open up that same UDP port at home on the Carrier Grade NAT side. Tailscale uses peer-to-peer communication, and it doesn't work in the same kind of traditional client-server way where one device initiates the connection. Instead, Tailscale uses a mesh VPN where both devices, your home connection and the VPS, they're going to both try and negotiate a connection simultaneously. And Tailscale's got a few tricks up its sleeve to be able to get through firewalls and NATs, such as NAT traversal and UDP hole punching. So it doesn't matter that our Unraid server which is running Tailscale is behind Carrier Grade NAT, because it can still easily, without issue, initiate an outgoing connection. And because we've just opened up this UDP port on the VPS side, well, the VPS, it's got a public IP address and the port is open, so it's going to be able to receive an incoming connection without issue as well. Right, anyway, let's get back on track to what we're doing and SSH into the VPS. So I'm just going to open up a terminal window here and SSH into the root user at the server's public IP address. Okay, so I'm SSH'd in now, so let's clear the screen. And the first thing we want to do is to install Docker. Now in the description of this video, you'll find all the commands you need there, so you can just copy and paste them. So first we'll run sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade -y. Okay, so with that done, now let's clear the screen. Now we need to install some packages, and like I said, you can get all of this in the description. Again, let's clear the screen. Next, we're going to add Docker's official GPG key and the official Docker repository. And now let's update the package list with sudo apt update. And now let's install Docker. Okay, again, let's clear the screen. Now let's check the status. And everything looks good here. And we can see the Docker version. Now we want to make sure that Docker starts when the server's rebooted. So for that, we're going to use sudo systemctl enable docker. Okay, so Docker's all installed, so let's clear the screen. Now we're going to install something called Portainer, which is really good for making it easy to install other containers. and we're going to use Portainer to actually install Swag. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a volume in which Portainer can put its data, and we're going to do that by using sudo docker volume create, and let's call it Portainer _ data. Okay, so next let's install Portainer. Again, you'll find this line in the description of the video, and we can see it's pulling down the container. Now normally to access Portainer, we would go to the IP address of the server and port 9000. Now because we haven't opened up port 9000, we can't actually do that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to install Tailscale and then use the Tailscale IP address to be able to get to port 9000. So let's install Tailscale. So it's super easy to install Tailscale. Here I am on my Tailnet here. So I'm just going to click on to download and Linux, and I'm going to copy this command here. So I'm just going to paste this in, and this will download and install Tailscale onto the VPS. Okay, so that's all done. So now I just need to type Tailscale space up. Oops, I really don't know what's wrong with my spelling today. Let's try again. Tailscale space up. Okay, that's better. And it gives us a URL here. So I'm going to copy this and then paste that into my browser. And here again, we just sign into our Tailscale account to connect this device to our Tailnet. And now looking here on my Tailnet, I can see that I've got Ubuntu added to the list. So let's copy the IP here. So now pasting that IP address into the address bar and adding :9000 for Portainer's port, we should go straight into Portainer's web UI. So now we need to create our admin user and password. So I'm just going to add a password here. And with that done, I'm going to click create user. Okay, so we just want to click on to get started here now, and then just click on this local environment here. Okay, so at the moment we can see we have just one Docker image, which is obviously Portainer itself. And if I click onto containers here, we can see the running containers. Now, an easy way to install new containers is if I go to settings here, and where it says URL, I'm going to paste, again, this is in the description of this video, this URL here, which will allow us to install various LinuxserverIO templates. So with that done, I'm going to click on to save. And now clicking on templates here, we can see various templates that we can install. So I'm just going to search for Swag, click onto this, and here, this is very similar to Unraid. This is where we fill in the variables to allow Swag to work. Okay, so to fill this in, I'm going to need a little bit of info from my Cloudflare account. So I'm going to go across to Cloudflare, which is where I've got my domain. Now, I've got other videos on setting up Cloudflare. So if you're not sure about that, then please look at my previous videos. So here's my domain name I'm going to use, called my-domain.uk. So obviously, for URL here, I'm going to paste my URL into the template. Now for validation, I'm going to change this here to DNS. And for subdomains, I'm going to choose wildcard, which will create a wildcard SSL certificate for this domain. Now DNS plugin, obviously I'm going to leave that as is for Cloudflare. And email address, I'm just going to put in my email address. So nothing else we need to put in here. Now we can scroll down and click on deploy container. Okay, so now we can see here in the containers section, we've got both Portainer and Swag that are running. Now we're not quite done yet. What we're going to do now is click onto Swag, and I'm going to click edit duplicate here, and I'm going to scroll down, and I just want to look and see where the volume is mapped to for the config folder here. So it says it's mapped to volume 1 docker swag config, so I'm going to copy that location here, and I'm going to go back to this terminal window, and I'm going to go into that directory and type ls to list out the files. Then I want to go into this folder here, this one called dns-conf. So I'll just type cd space dns-conf, and if we list the files here, this contains the file here, Cloudflare ini, and it's this file here we need to edit to allow Swag to be able to actually create an SSL certificate. So to edit that file, we're going to use nano. So just type nano space cloudflare.ini. And here we need to put the email address, which we use for the Cloudflare account, which for me is my dummy test account I use for Cloudflare. And I use this email address here, spaceinvader.testing@gmail.com. Now next underneath here, we need to paste in our Cloudflare API key. And to get that, we need to go back to Cloudflare. And on the top right here, we just click My Profile, then API Tokens, and we can click on View the Global API Key, and click to copy that. And then we just paste the key into this section here. Now, obviously, this key isn't my real one. It's one I've just made up for this video. And in a moment, I'm going to come back and change it. So with that done, we just click Ctrl and O to write out the file, hit Enter to confirm the name, and then Ctrl and X to exit. Okay, so again, we're not done here yet. We need to go back into the main config folder here. So to do that, I'm going to type cd space and then ... which will go upper directory. And so here I'm in Schwag's config folder. Okay, so let's list the files. And next I'm going to go into the Nginx. And then in here, proxy confs, which will have the configuration files for the various different containers that Schwag can proxy to. And if I type ls, we can see there's a whole load. Now the one I'm interested in here is this one here, jellyfin.subdomain.conf.sample. So I'm going to actually edit this file, and I'm going to type nano and the name of that file. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is go back now to my Tailscale web UI, and here we can see my Unraid server on this Tailnet here. What we're going to need is the Tailscale IP. Now again, if you've just seen this video and you haven't seen my other Tailscale videos, you'll see how to install Tailscale on Unraid in one of those. So I'm going to grab here the IP address, and I'm now going to go back to the config file, and everywhere where I see it say set upstream app and then the name of the app, well, I'm going to change from the name of the app to the Tailscale IP of my Unraid server. So now the upstream app is the IP address of the Unraid server, and the upstream port, we leave that the same. For Jellyfin, that's 8086. So basically it's going to be proxied through the VPN across onto my Unraid server over to Jellyfin. So we can see this container has got this twice. So I need to replace both of them. Okay, so with that done, now we need to actually save this file. And so to do that, on our keyboard, we need to press Ctrl and O to write out this file. Now you'll notice here that the file name is jellyfin.subdomain.conf.sample. Now it's very important that we don't save it as .sample, that we take the .sample off and just save it as jellyfin.subdomain.conf. Because Schwag, when it loads, it just loads all the files that are .conf and applies that to the reverse proxy. Okay, so now I'm going to hit enter, and it's asking if I want to save under a different name, so I'm going to hit Y for yes. So now that's saved, we can now exit Nano by holding down the control key and pressing X. Okay, so now you can breathe a sigh of relief because that's all the command line work done now, and we can go back to Portainer, and we're going to need to restart Schwag. So we need to click on containers here to go to Portainer's running containers. I'm going to select Schwag here and then click on to restart. Now if you remember, when Schwag restarts, it reloads all those .conf files, so it's going to reload the Jellyfin file, and the proxying, fingers crossed, should be working. Now before we move on, let's just talk about the ports. We know that Portainer uses port 9000, and we were getting to that through the actual Tailscale network, but you can see Schwag, it uses 443 and 80. Now if you remember, we did forward 443 in the VPS's firewall, but we didn't do port 80. We didn't do port 80 because that's used for HTTP verification, and because we're using Cloudflare and we're using DNS verification, well, we don't need that port. So because port 443 is open, Schwag is going to be able to receive all HTTPS traffic coming in, and then it's going to be able to actually route it over the VPN back to our Unraid server where we need it. Now whilst we're here, let's just have a look at the logs and check we can't see any errors. Okay, so that's a good sign. It says server ready and our certificate was generated. So last thing we need to do now is go across to Cloudflare, go to our domain, then DNS, and I need to add an A record for Jellyfin pointing to the public IP address of our VPS server. Now again, this is just one I've made up. I'm going to come back and change it to the correct one in a moment. But we want to make sure that we don't have this proxy, just have it unproxied, and then just click save. So now you can see I've got my public IP address, and jellyfin.my-domain.uk is pointing to my VPS. So now let's go back to my Unraid server here. So if we log in and go to the Docker page, we can see here that Jellyfin's running, and if I open it locally, then obviously I can go straight in. But if I close this now and open a new tab and I use the domain, so if I paste in here https jellyfin.my-domain.uk, well, hopefully I should go straight through. Okay, so here we are. I'm straight into Jellyfin, and so the data for Jellyfin is going from my Unraid server to my VPS and then back from the VPS across to my laptop here. I'm playing back video over the reverse proxy through the VPN. There's no buffering, works absolutely fine. As you can see, it's looking perfect. So if your server's behind Carrier Grade NAT, well, this is a great way to overcome that. You're not going to have any restrictions for what you're reverse proxying like you would with a Cloudflare tunnel. No issues with the amount of data or the type of traffic, so you can proxy any containers you want through the VPS, through Swag, over Tailscale, back to your Unraid server. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm just going to update all of my containers here. Now, thanks very much for watching this video, and I really do hope you found it useful. If you did, I'd really appreciate you giving it a thumbs up and sharing it with anyone else who you think might find this video useful. Now, as always, I want to give a really big thank you to all of my patrons and supporters out there. Thank you so much, guys, for all of your support. If it wasn't for you, I really wouldn't be able to make these videos. Anyway, guys, it's getting late here and it's time for me to go. But whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.